All right, so the African Cup of Nations gets underway on Sunday in Cameroon. We had the great Joey Doe on the show last night, a two-time African Cup of Nations winner. To do, well, what we thought was going to be a preview. We ended up just spending half an hour talking about his time with Cameroon and some of the great stories. So we didn't really get an opportunity to chat about what might happen in the tournament itself. To do just that this evening, I'm delighted to be joined on the line by football author and journalist Jonathan Wilson. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm very well. So you're going to be heading over to Cameroon for the knockout stages of the African Cup of Nations. I mentioned that Joey Doe was on. We never got into talking about the football side of things, what's going to happen over the next few weeks. And unfortunately, with the African Cup of Nations, that often seems to be the way, that the tournament itself, the build-up is always dominated by players who've been taken from the big clubs in Europe and questions about the infrastructure and whether the host country is actually able to host the tournament. In terms of what to expect from the football, is this a tournament we should be looking forward to?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I always think at tournaments, the actual quality of football doesn't really matter that much. And I mean, we can both look back to 1990 and say, if we take ourselves out of our respective England and Ireland bubbles, the football probably wasn't that great. But from an England point of view and an Ireland point of view, that was a great World Cup. And I think great tournaments are defined by the narratives around them and by the feeling of the tournament. And what I'm really looking forward to this time, and COVID could get in the way, but Cameroon is a country with a stadium-going tradition. And I think one of the disappointing things, I mean, this will be my 10th Cup of Nations. And the first time I went with Mali in 2002, and the stadiums were full enough, half full, three quarters full. A lot of that was the army sort of packing it out. But a lot of the tournaments have been empty, particularly for games not involving the hosts. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, to do with ticket pricing and where the stadiums are. So, I mean, for instance, in Gabon, in OM, the stadium was 45 minutes drive out of town, in a town where nobody has a car. So even as a relatively rich Western journalist who could pay for a taxi, it was still annoying. If you were a local person, you had no chance. But actually, the biggest reason is because so much football is dominated by Europe. The way that people consume their football, to take Gabon as an example, if you're a football fan in Libreville or I am, and you think, I'm gonna watch a game on Saturday afternoon, you don't go to the local stadium. You go to the bar, or you get your mates around to watch the telly, and your entire idea of how to watch football is watching European football on a screen. So even when the tournament is down the road, you don't have that sort of sense of, well, we go to the stadium to watch football. You still think, right, no, I just want to watch it in the bar with my mates having a beer, or they can come around and we can grill some meat and get a few cans in. But in Cameroon, there is that great culture of going to football. And we saw, was it 2016, the Women's Cup of Nations there, then the Chan, which is the tournament for players based in Africa. Both of them got big crowds, even for games not involving Cameroon. Now, COVID does present a problem that capacity has been capped for Cameroon games at 80% and for non-Cameroon games at 60%. There's some talk of vaccine passports, which seems to me totally unworkable in context, particularly when I think only 3% of Cameroonians are fully vaxxed. So I from a spectacle point of view, from having crowds in the stadium, having people actually enjoying the tournament there and then, I really hope this lives up to Mali, which is 20 years ago now.
In terms of Cameroon, then, as the host nation, they have as rich a footballing history as any of the African nations. With that will bring a certain degree of pressure, and I'm guilty of looking through the squad lists and, like everybody, looking at the players that are playing for some of the big clubs around Europe, and they are hugely boosted by having Andre Onana back from suspension. Mm-hmm. What should Cameroon be expecting with that home advantage? Do you think they can look going deep and winning a sixth African Cup of Nations?
Well, their home record is extraordinary. They haven't lost a competitive game at home since 1973. So from that point of view, you'd have to say, yes, they should be among the favourites. And I was sort of looking at the odds last night, and I think they're about 14-1, which seems pretty generous to me. It's not a great squad. It's not as good a squad as won it 20 years ago. There's no equivalent of Patrick Mboma or Samuel Eto'o or Jeremy or anybody like that. Onana back, as you say, from his drugs ban, which he seems to have been deeply unfortunate over. That his story is that he had a headache. It was the middle of the night. He went to the medicine box, got out what he thought was a paracetamol, and it turned out to be some dietary pill of his wife's, and that was why he failed the test. I think it was his third test in a week. So I think he was unlucky. You've got Choupo-Moting, from Bayern Munich now, was at PSG, but it's not a star-studded squad. But they weren't a star-studded squad when they won it the tournament before last. And I think actually in the Cup of Nations, solidity and organisation and team spirit probably go further than they do in some other tournaments. So I think they'd certainly be expecting sort of quarterfinals, absolute minimum, probably semi-final, and I think given their home record and given how lively and passionate that crowd in the Hyundai is likely to be, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't win it. But as you say, they don't have the glitziest of squads.
Joey Ndo was making that very point last night, that when it comes to looking at potential winners, the team with the superstar isn't necessarily the one to look out for. You need that solidity and team spirit. And what Cameroon had around the turn of the century was a perfect mix of having the superstar of a Samuel Eto'o, but also behind that, a real sense of unity. When we're talking about superstars right now, there ain't anybody bigger than Mo Salah. Mm-hmm. And in terms of the weight of expectation on his shoulders, I guess 2.5 years ago was in Egypt. He was still one of the best players in the world at that stage. Now it feels he's coming into this tournament, though, as maybe the very best player in the world right now. Is there enough around him in that Egypt squad to help carry them through?
I think there probably is. I mean, there's a couple of issues there beyond just the ability of the squad. So it's generally true that Egyptian players, a lot of them stay at home. And that's because the Egyptian league is pretty well funded, certainly by comparison with the rest of Africa. So there's no great sort of desire to go running off chasing the cash. I think this is a sort of solid squad with quite an interesting forward line as well. You look at Omar Mamouche as well. He's I think he's on loan to Stuttgart, isn't he? He's only 22, but is very highly rated. So he's not the only forward there by any means. We got Mustafa Mohammed, who is very highly rated. It's 24. He's at Galatasaray now. But there's two issues that make me slightly uneasy about Egypt. So one is North African teams traditionally do not do well in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the only team to buck that trend is Egypt in 2008 and 2010 when they won it in Ghana and Angola. They're the only two North African teams to have won the tournament outside of North Africa. And then the other thing, which seems to me incredible, and I don't think anybody's even begun to try and resolve it yet, is that the final is on February the 6th. Now, on February the 5th, you have a Club World Cup in which Monterrey are playing Al Ahly, the Egyptian champions, and 6 of this squad play for Al Ahly. So what happens to those 6 players? Presumably they stay with Egypt, but do their club want them back? Are they going to be sort of have half a mind in Abu Dhabi and half a mind in Cameroon? I think that's it shows part of the problems of structuring a global calendar, which is always an issue with a Cup of Nations. But the fact that FIFA couldn't even organise this to have a Club World Cup not overlapping with the Cup of Nations seems to me extraordinary.
In terms of the squad with the most depth then, a quick look would suggest Senegal have a real depth throughout and plenty of options in almost every part of the pitch. Would that be your thought on it as well? Overall, are they the strongest?
I think that in terms of players, that's definitely true. They got to the final last time, of course. I think Aliou Cissé, I've seen in Senegalese press the last couple of weeks, seems to be some doubts about him as a tactician, saying he's just a man manager, which certainly wasn't my sense. I mean, obviously, they're watching Senegal all the time. I saw them in Egypt 3 years ago. I was really impressed by them then. The thing I thought we saw in Egypt was that there's been this culture for a long time that African nations tend not to trust their own coaches. They bring in a European or a Brazilian wherever they can. And what you saw there was the 2 finalists, Algeria with Djamel Belmadi and Aliou Cissé with Senegal, were both players who had spent the bulk of their career in Europe. They'd had that sort of European education of playing at a very high level in Europe. And then they'd taken that back to their own country. And that seemed to me, it seems to me overdue. And it seems to me a healthier way of doing things, that we're used to players going through that process, but why was it not happening with coaches? Now you look at this tournament, 14 of the 24 coaches are domestic. And that's a much higher proportion than we've had, certainly in recent memory. And that, I think, is very encouraging. Now, it's a slightly false stat in you've got Augustin Eguavoen with Nigeria, who's an interim coach for bewildering reasons that don't really make much sense. Gunnar Röhr, the German, was released on December the 12th. Pereira, the Portuguese coach, is coming in at the end of the tournament. But Augustin Eguavoen, you may remember, is the great centre-back from 1994. He had a brief spell in charge of the national team. When would that have been? 2007, 2008, something like that. He's back in charge. So, yeah, in a sense, it's 14, but really it's 13 and an extra one with an asterisk. So, yeah, I was impressed by Aliou Cisse. I think they play a pretty sort of sophisticated, modern form of football, in as much as you can at national level, where you obviously don't have the time that a club manager would have. They certainly have the depth, but they've never won it before. And you do wonder if that plays on minds a bit. I mean, I was in Mali in 2002 when Senegal got to the final. Yeah, they beat Nigeria in the semi and then lost on penalties to Cameroon in the final. And that was that great side that, of course, went on to get to the quarterfinal of the World Cup later that year with El Hadji Diouf and, well, Aliou Cisse himself, Pape Bouba Diop. Yeah, that was a squad probably the equal of this one. And they just fell at the last. So I do wonder whether, psychologically, there might be a sense of, it's never going to be our turn. But this is the strongest squad they've had since.
The African Cup of Nations has gone the way of most major tournaments. The European Championship is becoming quite bloated. So we have a 24-team tournament, but it'll only go down to 16 teams after the group stage. If there is a group stage game to look forward to, it may not mean anything. It probably won't mean anything by the time to get to it. It's Algeria against Ivory Coast, which is the last match in Group E, because, again, they look, with Algeria as the defending champions and Ivory Coast with just a huge amount of quality, look like two teams who could be among the contenders.
Yeah, and you're right. I just hope that's not a dead rubber. I mean, we've seen this before, even at World Cups, where you get to what you've sort of been looking forward to is the big clash, and it ends up being they both play sort of slightly weakened sides. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting with Ivory Coast. Yeah, they had that long spell of having the golden generation, and to be honest, it had almost gone by the time they finally won the thing in 2015, which is the first time they've won it since 1992. Drogba had retired by then, for instance, and there was this sort of sense of what are they going to do when that generation gets out of the way? Well, actually, the new generation is almost as good. I mean, Sébastien Haller, scoring hatfuls of goals this season. So maybe not quite a Drogba's quality, but you can't say that it's a massive drop off. And then people like Maxwell Cornet in midfield, Jean-Michel Seri, Franck Kessié, Bailly and Cannon, who were the two alongside Kolo Touré, who won it in 2015, but also backed up by people like Willy Bully. Sajoria there is another figure that in Europe we're very aware of. So yeah, I don't think it's quite as good as a squad of 6 years ago, but they definitely, I think, will be looking at sort of quarterfinals, semi-finals, as an absolute minimum.
All our football coverage on Off the Ball is brought to you by Sky, and you can watch every match from the African Cup of Nations live on Sky Sports starting from Sunday. Just before we let you go, Jonathan, there'll be lots of players that will crop up over the next couple of weeks, and you go, didn't realise that's who he was playing for. And the number one on that list, I think, will be Stephen Calker, who I spotted the name in the Sierra Leone squad and thought, that couldn't be that Stephen Calker, who I remember being at Anfield that night, where Liverpool, in their desperation against Arsenal, bring on Stephen Calker up front in a 3-3 draw. And an even further deep dive into Wikipedia, I hadn't even realised that he had played one international and scored at his one international for England. He's been through a hell of a tough time personally over the last few years. Hasn't played for Sierra Leone yet, but is in their squad.
He is in their squad. I noticed that they've got a goalkeeper called Kolka as well. I don't know if he's any relation or if that's just coincidence, but the Kolka is a goalkeeper, doesn't have a Wikipedia page. I would have checked this for you. So yeah, I mean, it's great to see him. And after, as you say, I'm slightly surprised he's only 30. He feels like a player who's about 38. And I guess when you've been at that level and you get injuries, you do whatever it takes to keep your enthusiasm going. And it's great for him to have a major tournament. And, I really hope he does well for his sake.
A couple of days away from kickoff. Who's your tip to win it?
See, I can see arguments against all of the. I'm going to come back to Cameroon, and it's really boring to go with the hosts, but I'm not confident in North African teams in Sub-Saharan Africa. I don't really trust Senegal mentally, although they were very good 3 years ago. Do I trust Cote d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast? Maybe. I think. Okay, it's a slightly different question I'm going to answer. If I were going to put an each way bet on, I'd be putting it on Cameroon. 14-1 for Cameroon looks a really great price to me. All
right, Jonathan, great stuff. Enjoy the next couple of weeks watching on TV and enjoy your trip to Cameroon then as well. Great to talk to you as always.
Cheers. Thank you very much.